Good evening to all our viewers and listeners, and welcome to another session of Time of the Writer 2022. My name is Michelle Constant, and as you know, the theme of this year's festival is Beyond Words, Imagination, Memory, and importantly, in this case, conscience. And I think we're going to be talking to people who really understand what having a conscience means. Our theme for tonight, or our title for tonight, is Uncaptured Beyond Any Words. Now, perhaps the Zondo Commission truly opened our eyes to what state capture was, but it is the testimony of the whistleblowers, those that choose to go public with what they believe or know to be ethically, morally, legally wrong, and also to understand what they also believe and know to be fraudulent and corrupt. It's a profoundly difficult decision to make, and one of our guests tonight, whistleblower Mosilo Mothepu, noted that she had a Damascene moment in making the decision to go public. And we'll talk about what that really means in order to have that Damascene moment. Conversely, author Mandy Weiner wrote a book called The Whistleblowers, and she talks of how the outcomes for whistleblowers themselves can be absolutely devastating, and I might add, extremely dangerous. And they are sometimes perceived to be contentious figures, which makes it even more difficult for them in their personal lives as well. This evening, I'd like to welcome four extraordinary guests. One of them will be joining us in around about 10 minutes. But I'd like to invite Mosilo Mothepu, whose book Uncaptured offers her account of Negate and the Trillian scandal. I also want to welcome Cynthia Stimpel, whose book Hijackers on Board offers an extraordinary account of the capture of SAA. Athol Williams' book, Deep Collusion, dives deep into the capture of the private sector, in this case, the company Bain and its participation in the capture of SARS. And Themba Maseko, who will be joining us in a while, his book, For My Country, looks at capture in the public sector and also the role of the individual in the public sector as well. Now, each of these books offers a powerful, a shocking, and I have to admit it, a fascinating narrative of how state capture has played out in the country. And to read all four of them together, one really starts to understand the ecosystem of capture, the help of the public and private sector players in creating that ecosystem. Last night, we chatted about the book, Praveen Gordon's book, Joining the Dots, and we understand now what that warning was. How do we join the dots? And each one of our guests tonight on the panel really did join the dots. In the case of all four books, that's exactly what we see. The ecosystem of capture demonstrating strategy, process, and outcome in the most terrible and awesome, and I mean awesome in possibly the worst ways. The thematic similarities of all four books are clear, and we are going to use those as our guidelines as we go through this evening's conversation. So what we'd like to do is maybe have around 40 minutes of conversation, and then of course open to you, our guests and listeners, for questions, for comments. You're welcome to put them into the chat lines and chat bars immediately, and we'll happily read them out as we go along. But those four themes or five themes that I'd like to go through are, firstly, the allure of a new and interesting job, and the allure of really good money. What does that mean for someone as they move forward? Secondly, the moment when the bells start to chime and the red flags start to wave. It's a difficult time, that, because that's the time, I imagine, where our guests would have had to think, do I continue or do I go into the third, which is the turning point or that Damascene moment. The fourth, and this is the one that really struck me as something really potent, poignant, and devastating. Into the depth of whistleblower hell. Mosilo calls it hell. I mentioned purgatory to them offline, but it feels from the conversations that it is far worse than the purgatory of just loneliness and fearfulness. But this is one where there is no turning back. Once you go there, as all of our guests will note, there's no turning back. And I think, as Athol mentioned in his book, the grief of loss, the loss of a normal life, is something extraordinarily profound that we would have to look at. Finally, I suppose we need to look at what happens when you come out on the other side. A deeply changed person, a deeply transformed person, but also a deeply changed and a deeply transformed life. And in our discussions in the green room, so to speak, those transformations and those changes are not necessarily for the good at all. And we'll be able to talk to that as well. But before we go into the journey, I'd like to start with each of you. And if I may, if you could perhaps briefly explain the overarching narratives of your books to our listeners. I know that Themba Maseko has joined us. So Themba, thank you so much for joining us in the room as well. But Athol, why don't we start with you? If you could briefly talk to us about your engagement in the private sector and what that overarching storyline or narrative for you was.
Thank you, Michelle. So in writing the book, I saw it as a continuation of my whistleblowing intent, which was to put what I knew in the public domain. I think there's going to be a time in our future, well, I hope there's a time in our future where we look back on today and say, no way, that could never have happened. And so partly putting the book out there, is this record that this has happened. This was real. This was a real challenge we had. It was also my belief that in acting in the public interest as a whistleblower, I needed to make sure that my testimony and what was captured there was just widely available, therefore going from affidavit to book. The overarching story of mine, Michelle, is basically Bain's involvement with SARS, colluding with Tom Moyane to capture SARS, which wasn't about extracting money from SARS per se. This one was unique. This is what trying to disable SARS' ability to go after illicit traders or tax evaders. But of course, what was powerful, just two things to mention, were powerful about the Bain and SARS story was one, that this was premeditated for up to a year before Tom Moyane or Bain got to SARS. This wasn't something they thought, hey, here's an idea, let's just do something. It was a plan, a strategy that went back almost 12 months before. This was the level of detail which was planned. And secondly, Michelle, much to my horror, is the fact that this planning involved Jacob Zuma directly. And so this was at the highest level of our country that this planning was done and executed. And so SARS was just one example of many other which we now know of and some we don't know of, where this was played out in our country.
Thank you. Cynthia, can we go to you? Just the overarching narrative for our listeners who may not have read the book. Cynthia, you need to, your mic is not on. You need to switch your mic on.
It's on. Thank you, Michelle. So the overview of my book is basically that I needed to tell my story and about SAA and the narrative of what happened at the time of the influence and the capture of SAA. So it was basically, the title was chosen by the editor though, so it's a good pun, Hijackers on Board, because it concerned our very board who were interfering in our governance process and making decisions around key procurement transactions. And so at the time of me whistleblowing, I felt I had no voice, that I was being choked and I was unable to talk because as I raised it within the organization, no one listened. So for me to write the book was a way of telling my story and having my voice. And so it was also a way of encouraging other whistleblowers. So at the end of my book, I actually put some self-help for whistleblowers and what we need to do to help whistleblowers and support them. So in a nutshell, that's what my story is about. Thank you.
I have to say that I think the annexure that you added at the end of the book was really good. I'm sure for anybody who is something is worrying them or that they're flagging, it's well worth their looking at. Themba, you have just joined us and we want to say welcome. It's a real delight to have you in the room. Thank you so much for making the time. Themba, if you could just briefly talk to us, your overarching narrative in the book, certainly coming from someone who was an activist during the apartheid struggle, it makes the story quite grievous, actually. I felt what must have felt like a true betrayal for you.
It was, in a way, because I mean, I've spent most of my adult life beginning with being an activist in the student movement, but also joining political structures, becoming an MP, and then joining government after feeling extremely bored sitting in parliament as a backbencher, and feeling that I needed to make a difference in the lives of people by becoming a civil servant or a public servant, as it were. And I spent a lot of years, 17 years all in all, as a public servant and working there, trying to make a difference. But then came the call from the Gupta brothers, who basically wanted me to help them steal money from the public purse. And as I was going to, after being pestered for a meeting by Ajay Gupta, eventually I agreed to have a meeting with him. And as I'm driving to the meeting with Ajay Gupta, I get a call from former President Zuma, basically saying there are these Gupta brothers who need my help. I must go and help them out. And that's when I realized that, it's, in a way, you could say the penny dropped, that in fact, this was not going to be an ordinary meeting. It was basically a meeting where the president is instructing me to assist the brothers without telling me what he wanted me to help them with. And as I get to the meeting with Ajay Gupta, I'm told that, in fact, I need to help them steal money from the public purse. And that's when I made a choice to defy both President Zuma, who was the most powerful politician in the country, and also the Gupta brothers. And out of that, I decided that, in fact, I was not going to cooperate with them. But in addition to that, I knew that, in fact, that would have consequences for me as a public servant. Eventually, it did. I ended up being removed from my position as a government spokesperson and transferred to another department. But you're correct. I mean, I felt a deep sense of betrayal, because as an activist and as a member of the ruling party at the time, to be asked by the head of state and head of the party.
Okay, Themba, we're having a slight problem with your
beliefs, and was why I joined the. Eventually, I decided to the former President Zuma and Gupta brothers. Is there a network issue?
There's a slight network issue, Themba. So what I would suggest is, as we go to Mosilo, perhaps you could just go offline and come back online, just so we can see if we can improve that. But just in reference to what Themba says, he quotes Mbisi Jonas in his book, where he says how it makes a mockery of our hard-earned democracy and the trust of our people. And Mosilo, I'd like to go to you to really just talk to the narrative of your own story, and also maybe to look, the book is quite, you're very honest in the book, and that you actually describe yourself as quote unquote politically naive. I mean, at one point you describe yourself as a BCom graduate with no interests whatsoever in politics. And I think that does take us in many ways to the first idea of what the allure of this job is. So let's look at the overarching story, but let's also look at what the allure was for you.
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening to my fellow panelists. Themba, good evening. My goodness, overarching. They call me the Negate whistleblower. My book is called Uncaptured. And it's called the Trillian scandal, but that's an underestimate. I had worked for regiments. As you said, I'm a financier. I've financed airports for the 2010. I used to read Financial Mail and Business Day. I knew who the Reserve Governor was. I knew who the Finance Minister was. I know what Jayabal and the bond yields were. That was me. But of course, I used to exercise my vote. When I went to regiments the second time in 2015, they had 250 people, and they had this model where they have business development partners. At the time, Salim Issa and Kuben Moodley. And apparently these two individuals opened the taps to the president, the ministers, and the board of the SOEs. Essentially, Regiment's Capital, a financial services company, had relationships and contracts with, I would say, the blue chip of state-owned companies, SAA, SA Express, Denel, Transnet, Eskom, earning billions of rands of fees alongside McKinsey, unethically, unlawfully. And we talk, my fellow panelists talked about 12 months. They call me the Negate whistleblower because the same day that Mzebisi Jonas was telling Nene about the offer of the Guptas to make him finance minister, which was the 26th of October, I was being told that Nene was going to be fired for and being replaced with a pliable minister who will essentially approve the nuclear deal, the $1 trillion Putin deal, and Dudu Mweni's Airbus swap deal. And I started seeing articles by Amabungani, and I realized that Trillian was an extension of state capture. I mean, the lure of it. I was the CEO of Trillian Financial Advisory. Being a Black woman CEO in a financial services sector is completely unheard of. I was less than 40, earning 2.3 million rand. I had a sign-on bonus of $500,000, and my 9-month performance bonus was 800,000. In March, when I realized that my call for corporate governance structures and compliance were falling on deaf ears, I left without another job. And I went to Tulima Donsela 3 months later. My Damascus moment, as you said, was at the Red Sea after having a very spiritual day. And I felt compelled spiritually that South Africa was burning. And I had to go back after seeing Tulima Donsela's terms of reference and after seeing Praveen's fraud case coming through, because already in the corridors of Trillian, we were told that Praveen was going to be fired around March 16th, my birthday, by the way, which is tomorrow, that he's not approving those deals as well. So, and I decided to essentially get back on the plane and go to Tulima Donsela. And I have to say to your viewers, I reconciled with death because I asked myself, what if they kill me? But if they find out, because everything leaks these days. But I also asked myself, what if I am charged with PRECA, because plus I have fiduciary responsibilities. So there's this term in my book where I said what really made me go was, what is more dignified for my mom? For her to lay a wreath on my grave because I'm brave and they assassinated me and I've done the right thing, or for me to be a coward, be charged with PRECA and aiding and abetting criminality. And she visits me in prison and she brings contraband and tampons. So I had to choose between a wreath and tampons. And I chose a wreath. I chose a wreath. And Helen sued well after that. I'm sure you'll give us opportunities to essentially, and you say what happens after. There's no after, because the Zondo report is coming out right now.
So we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. I do want to, Athol, if I can ask you, we spoke about the allure of a new job, and also a new job that comes with great money and great opportunities. In your book, you talk about the role of the consulting sector, the private sector, as it's a very massive business, And if I understand from your book, you note that it's unregulated, relatively unregulated, but you also quote that it has enormous margins. And I wondered from you, what made Bain so dangerous? You describe it as a weaponized business advice. I wonder if you could talk to that.
Yeah, it's, when you compare the legal profession, the medical profession, engineering, accounting, there's requirements to become a CA. Right? You must write exams, there's a board exam, you must pass, and you belong to a professional body so that if you misbehave, they can strike you from that profession. Management consulting is none of those. There's no exam to write to get in. There's no professional body overseeing it. No one providing codes of ethics. So it's really a sort of secret society, and these organizations do employ smart, educated, capable people, but it all happens in secret. There's no requirement under financial reporting rules to declare whether you're using management consultants, who they are and what you're using them for. Whereas often there is a requirement to declare who your auditors are, who your accounting firm is, and what you're doing with them. Which is so ironic given how powerful management consultants are. And that's the difficulty. Most of us don't know what they do because that's their goal. They don't want people to know what they do. But effectively, management consultants work with CEOs, with boards, but the most powerful boards and CEOs about improving business performance, making sure those businesses are successful. But it's often driven by helping the CEO be successful, or particular members of the board be successful. Now, remember, I'm talking about this not as an investigative journalist, but an insider. I'm a lifer. I started at Bain when I was 25 years old in their head office in Boston, and then left in 2019. So I was trained in the Bain system from a young professional all the way up. So I know the training, I know what the objectives are, I know how they operate. And so it's not, I don't want to give the impression that it's all this evil stuff that's going on. It's more that consulting creates the opportunity for evil things to go on. Because it's so secretive, because the amount of money involved is so absurd all the time, there's no way of benchmarking, right? So in finance, Mosilo might say, well, they'll charge a percent, her fee will be a percent of the funds they raise. In strategy consulting, there's no benchmark. I sit with the CEO, we agree this value is, $100 million. So that seems reasonable, that's the fee. And that's why we know, for example, McKinsey could have earned 2 billion Rand from Eskom and Transnet, where they can show no real impact. Bain has similarly earned 2 billion Rand from state institutions of those few years when Zuma was in power. So there's big money, massive influence. And why I say Bain particularly, but McKinsey as well, should be of concern to any democracy loving person is the power they have globally, right? We make the mistake if we say this is about money only, right? Michelle, I find it so profound. What made the 12 CEOs who make up Business Leadership South Africa decide to re-embrace Bain and defend them publicly? What was that? That wasn't envelopes being slipped to them. Those people don't need the money. It's the influence Bain has globally, not even in South Africa. And I keep thinking, the more I think about that, the more I think, that's why we should be worried, because they're operating in Russia and China, they're operating around the world, and that's the power, the level at which they operate. So the fact that they got their tentacles into our state institutions and our corporate South Africa should worry us, because we know what Bain did at SAA many years ago, right? And still doing it at SAA.
So let's go to Cynthia. And Cynthia, if we can talk, you in your book, you talk about SAA, and you write about the difference between the private sector and a state-owned enterprise. In fact, you describe it as quite a shock when it comes to the differences in culture. And I think that what's critical about that is that it describes a change and a sense of being uncomfortable. And I started to wonder, I think one of you used the term grooming. I don't know if I've put that in my head or if one of you did write that, but it made
that
me
was
feel.
me, Michelle. Eric what groomed me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a powerful idea that actually you can be in the structure that someone is slowly nurturing or grooming or whatever the case may be. Cynthia, your experience of that shift in culture and what was going on. Talk to us about that. Your microphone is off, Cynthia. I think you're welcome to.
My background has primarily been in banking, and which is the private sector. And having come from many years, at least if I can say over 30 years in the private sector, my last 10 years was at SA, to move into SA and realizing that decisions are not made the same day or within a short space of time. That for me was a culture shock. The second was just the way we worked. I always worked in a treasury environment. Everything that happened on the day was done on the day. Accounts, if there were any transactions done, they were booked in the system and closed that day. Reports were run by that evening or the very morning when you came in, or overnight, depending how automated your system was. If we had anything to go to board, documents were done, they went to your subcommittees and they went to board. It was either approved or not approved, and you had to go back to the drawing board. So the change for me was coming into an environment where many debates were done about issues and recommendations were made of how we can solve it, but yet none of those recommendations were ever taken. It always went another month or 2 months or 3 months, and everything we did had to go to board first. So in a treasury environment, you had your group treasurer, you had your financial risk committee, you had your executive. So decisions are made at those levels. And if you had a delegation of authority, that's where your decisions were made. But still, we had to take it up to board. So certain decisions, even in hedging, had to go to board. So 3 months down the line, a decision is made when you have to hedge. By the time you have to effect the change, the market is moved. So it's not worthwhile doing it. So for me, that was truly the culture shock. On your earlier question on the allure of the job I thought this was my dream job when I became the group treasurer. And I was so happy. And for a very short time, within 6 months, it was no longer the dream job. Thank you. Yes.
Cynthia, did you, and I want to take this to Mosilo as well, did you, once those red flags, as you say, 6 months is a very short time. Wow, I mean, that's your 100 days come and gone very quickly. Once those red flags started to wave or the bell started to ring, talk to us about how you resolved that for yourself before you actually made the massive decision, you know, the famous Damascus moment.
Yes. So my first...
Is this for Cynthia or myself?
Cynthia, and Mosilo will come to you in a moment.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thanks, Michelle. So the first part was when I noticed board interfering was as early as June. I started acting the beginning of the year in 2015. And then I noticed they were interfering as in directing the team in Treasury what to do. They wanted to give suppliers to provide funds for SA. We were going on a request for proposal to source funding. And I wrote to them very naively, just saying, board, this is our role. Here is our policies. This is what we have to do. We within our policies and our governance process. This is boards. And then I get an email back from the company secretary saying, you're not allowed to write to board. That's the first time I found that out. The second was when we do make recommendations to board, and board discounts everything we put, and they bring in a client that did not go through the RFP process. My hair stood up. I walked around with that board resolution for days. I went speaking to every manager in my peer group. I called meetings to say, we cannot accept this. And so yet no one was prepared to challenge the board. They all said, it's a board resolution. My very deputy said, it's a board resolution. I have to abide by it. And I said, yes, but I cannot abide by something that has not followed our internal governance process. And so even the process goes even further, where the board then brings in a transaction advisor and then changes the scope of that. So all this time I've been talking to my family about it. So the process is never easy. Thank you.
Mosilo, I think Cynthia earlier was saying that she was silenced, which is very potent. And I wondered, when those red flags started to like wave for you, were you feeling silenced? I know that you had one very good colleague, close friend, who was there that you could discuss things with. Did you feel though that you were being silenced by Eric Wood himself as well?
You know, the allure of being a Black female CEO in the financial services, I think from within 5 days of me being CEO, I could realize that I'm just supposed to be female and Black, and all the decision makers were either Eric Wood or Salim Issa, or what he called his advisors, Stan Shane, who was at Transnet, Clive Angel, and Mark Chipkin. So it was window dressing. So that was essentially a red flag for me as well, that we took on the fiduciary risk and responsibility, but the company was run by outsiders. And for me, it was very, very disappointing. But what was more alarming was the fact that Trillian didn't have any contract with any single entity, but it was invoicing billions of rands. We can talk about the 12 billion rand club loan. It simply invoiced 94 billion rand to Transnet. It was paid within 2 days. I did that work at Regiments. 75 million of that went towards Tegeta to buy Optimum. Zondo has, in his report, confirmed that. He's even confirmed that, and I felt vindicated. You're not supposed, private sector is not supposed to know what the president is thinking with regards to reshuffle. It went around the corridors of Regiments and Trillian. And at the time, I didn't understand what the executive ethics code was until I read my Doncella's terms of reference. So it was racketeering, because it was in collusion with and money laundering and corruption and theft. You had these players from the board and the executives. Cynthia, you talk about transaction advisors. When Matang, the Transnet treasurer, refused for Regiments to advise Transnet on the 12 billion rand club loan, she was forced out. She said, I came here with integrity, and I'm going to leave with integrity. And Regiments came in and they charged 189 million rand to raise a 2.5 billion rand US dollar loan from the China Development Bank. The Treasury had the capacity to do that. Same with Eskom. You had Caroline Henry. If you see that the 4 executives were all taken out to bring in Molefe and Anuj, because the next cash cow was Eskom, and they knew that they would do the Guptas and Trillian's bidding. And Caroline Henry was hounded out. She was given an exit package because she wouldn't want to work with Trillian. And so Anuj made himself a CEO and an acting treasurer. There was no contract with Trillian, no McKenzie, no Eskom. They paid 700 million rand. Today, Anuj Singh he's been struck off the cycle. And because of my affidavit, and I also had to write an affidavit for Eskom and in civil court, saying that the relationship between Eskom executives and Trillian was corrupt. And that 1 billion rand that McKinsey was paid was unlawful, no money ad, and the 700 million that Trillian was paid, it was unlawful. So we're talking about essentially taking out good people who stand up for integrity, and you replace them with yes men. For, as we've seen at the Zondo Commission, they get they go to Saxon World and get money in brown leather sports bag. That's our democracy was sold for that. It's a travesty.
Let's go to this taking out good people, because I'm interested to know from all of you whether in that moment that you decided this is what I'm going to do, did you have any sense of the long-term impact it would have on your world? And we'll talk about what that long-term impact is. Athol, I'll start with you. When you made that decision, you know, Mosilo's famous Damascus moment, when you finally said, okay, fine, that's it. Did you have any sense for yourself? Did anybody advise you for yourself as to what the damage is? I see Cynthia's already shaking her head on that one. Athol.
I had no idea, because there was no one to turn to. That's when you discover there's no website to go to back then of where to get help. There's no number to call. There's no number to call in our country for getting help to act against corruption. I understood that I was taking major risk. I knew I'd get major backlash from the 39 parties I implicated. So I understood that. But what I underestimated was how the rest of corporate South Africa would step away from me. So none of the law firms would help me, because all of the law firms were tied up with the people I'd implicated. When I contacted a law firm, and you can think of the big 5 law firms, the first thing that asked me is for the names of the people I implicate. When I give them the names of the people I implicate, they tell me they can't help me. What shocked me was that corporate South Africa, who as a strategy advisor I'd worked with all of 20 years, every single CEO, and I'll name all of them, I've named all of them so many times, said to me, Athol, sorry, we can't help you out. We can't do anything with you. That's what shocked me, Michelle.
Yeah. Themba, I'm hoping that Themba is in the room. I know that he was in the room for a few seconds, so we'll wait till we get him back again. Cynthia, you wrote this incredibly moving piece where you talk about the deep depression at the time of your decision, where you said one part of my brain said, just stay in bed and cry. One part of my brain said something else. And that decision that you had to make, talk to us about that.
Michelle, one goes through self-doubt. So that decision one takes when you whistleblow, you do it because of your moral compass, for your principles, your belief, and you know that you're standing up for the truth. But when the result happens after that, the impact on you, you realize how naive you are about the support around you. And so you go through the self-doubt. You actually feel ashamed. You feel like, why didn't I just keep quiet and stand at the radar screen? So that piece that I write, it's the opening piece, was the first morning after I was suspended when I woke up. It was, how do I go from here? Because for me, that was such a crucial point. Had I not got out of bed, I think I could have, my life could have ended up differently, indeed. Yeah. And here I was forcing myself to get out of bed. And if you've watched that movie called Kill Bill, where Uma Thurman talks to her big toe to move, it was exactly that, move that big toe. And for me, it was just telling myself, get up, get out of bed, keep your routine, go forward, So it is very hard. And I can imagine that each of our whistleblowers here and many others that are around the world have experienced something similar, because it is that doubt, it is that shame, because it's like, what now? It's so overwhelming that you don't know how to go forward. Thank you.
So Peter Afterhede has asked this question, and I'll put it to all of you. How important was the knowledge and understanding of previous whistleblowers, both South African and international, in your decision to become a whistleblower? And it's a very interesting question, that, because I'm wondering, did any of you do research around whistleblowers both locally and internationally? Mosilo, you are shaking your head. Athol shaking his head. Cynthia Stimpel. Okay, Mosilo, let's start with you.
Thank you. I had heard of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, but I didn't know the details of whistleblowing. I went to a corporate lawyer who essentially guided me to the Companies Act and the Protective Disclosure Act. Now, in a normal company, what happens when your boss is corrupt, the chairman is corrupt, SAPS is corrupt, the Hawks are corrupt, the NPA is corrupt, and the president is corrupt. So I went to Trillian because of her work she did in securing comfort at the Nkandla 230-something million rand Jacob Zuma homestead. And she was the only institution that I trusted because of her integrity. She stood firm, her resilience. Hence, I started the journey then. I think Sylvia and Athol, they started this journey at Zondo. I started with Trillian. I was at the Eskom inquiry, many disciplinary matters with Transnet and Eskom. I was supposed to be the first witness at the Machela Kokos disciplinary. So for 2 years, I was a professional oath taker. I have to say what shocked me was I was expecting the report to be out for the Hawks and the NPA to investigate and for me to get a job within 3 to 6 months. But that didn't happen, as we said. The last 15 years, corruption was rewarded and ethics and integrity were punished. My story is quite different from the other two, is that my statement was leaked to the Sunday Times. I was deemed a political risk, like Athol. I was unemployed for 2 years, so corporate wouldn't touch me with a stick. I said in my book, we were treated like lepers, outcasts. Every single whistleblower. Themba, I'm not sure if you're there. Congratulations on your new appointment at Vets after, I think, over 12 years. I was the one who was hounded by the Hawks and the MPA with my 9 criminal charges. I had 1,300,000 rand legal fees, and none of the NGOs nor the law firms would support me. It took Pluff, who support myself and Athol. They support Snowden and Julian Assange as well. They just for those of our listeners who don't know, Pluff is the platform for the protection of African whistleblowers. Maybe you could just expand a little bit on what that is, Mosilo. Thank you. So they started it's the founders, William Bardon. If you look at my book, Uncaptured, I'm very honored to have 2 people who wrote my foreword. It was Trillian and William Bardon. So they essentially assisted Julian Assange and Snowden. They opened an African office in 2016. And there was an article about me, how to bleed a whistleblower dry in the Mail and Guardian. And they saw this article because Trillian was doing the lawfare, Stalingrad, just oppose everything so that we bleed her dry. And they flew down from Paris, and they reduced my bill from 1.3 million to 700,000, and they paid, and they still continue to support me today. Athol, I share your sentiments. It's a travesty. It's a shame that corporate SA has shunned us. I was taken in by MTN, Rob Shooter, for 2 years, 2018 to 2020. And I got my dignity back, and Cynthia, you couldn't get a job. Bianca Goodson couldn't get a job. But I have to say that there's never, like Cynthia, I never, ever, ever regretted what I did. Had I not done what I did, the Trillian Regiment's arm of state capture will not have been known. And you know what? The sacrifices were huge. I mean, Cynthia, you talk about staying in bed for one day. Over those 2 years, I was in bed for all of those 2 years. I was chronically depressed. I had post-traumatic stress disorder, insomnia, and the isolation was just, and it was soul destroying. And you lost faith in humanity and whatever spiritual being, which is my God. I was angry at him because I felt that he gave me the conviction to take me on this road, and I felt forsaken and let down.
Mosilo, I'm going to just pause you for a moment there, if I may, because something that Athol mentioned off air as well is the lack of protection, the needing to change homes, and even in Athol's case, countries. Cynthia, you've spoken about moving houses at times. It's not only a lonely road, it's also, as you've all noted, an extremely dangerous road. We know of the death recently of Professor Mohammed Sabir Tayo, who was gunned down. We don't know if it was because of the work he was doing, but likewise the whistleblower Babita Deokaran. And I wonder, Athol, for you, if you could maybe just talk it through. I mean, at one point in your book, you talk about the grief, the loss of normal life.
Michelle, I actually don't want to talk about it because I think it's shameful on South Africa. I want to ask your listeners why they do nothing, right? Why is it okay that we saw something wrong and at risk to ourselves said we want to do something about it? That's what we effectively did. And now South Africa sees something being wrong being done to us. And yet South Africa's silent. I mean, there's silence. So I don't know. I don't understand the world, to be honest.
What do you think that is, Athol? If you think about it from your space, what do you think that is?
The apathy. Well, that's what it is. It's we cared enough to say we will do something that's right for our country, not what's right for us. What was right for all of us was actually to be quiet. I would have had an amazing job now, earning many, many millions. And like Mosilo and Cynthia said, it was my dream job. It literally was my dream job. And I said, no, I want to live in a country where corruption is punished, where wrong is identified. And so I will speak up. That's what I did. And I said to South Africa, this is what I'm doing for you. You didn't ask for it, but I'm hoping you see some good out of this. And then I said, but I want your help, South Africa. And I mean, I'm talking down to the High Commissioner in London, the South African High Commissioner saying to me, sorry, we can't help you, go. So that's what South Africa is currently saying. And so for me, it's an ethical issue that we face in our country. We're willing to see a woman suffer gender violence and we walk past her. We're willing to see someone live in a shack and we walk past them. And the same with us. Here we are publicly saying, right, our lives are in danger, we're struggling, I've got no money to pay for myself. And not a single person who has means has said, Athol will help.
Yeah. So just as a note, Joanne Hitchens, the author, writes, such courage, thank you all. Warren Neebe, who is from the Wits University Drama for Life project, writes, profound testimony, inspiring courage, thank you, thank you. So just as the sidebar. Cynthia, you talk a lot, and I know Themba did as well, about the importance of family. Mosilo, you did as well. Actually, all of you did, my apologies. But just the critical role of family in such an unspeakably terrible time that you were in. Tell us a little bit about that. microphone. You have to switch your microphone.
I thought I switched it on already, sorry.
No, it's fine.
My family, yeah, we are a close-knit family. I come from a very large family, and my parents taught us values at an early age, and I think I described that quite intensely in my book. But where it played a huge role was during the time of me firstly wanting to whistleblow. I had various discussions, firstly with my husband, then my 2 daughters, and then with my siblings, and then my bigger family group, my in-laws, and etc. And in that, we had many discussions. They all said, you know, you're going to lose your job. It was a fact. They all said, you know what's going to come out of this. And I said, I do know, you know. And the good side was that everyone said, look, we will have your back.
Okay, I think we've Cynthia's frozen there.
Throughout the pain I suffered. Oh, you can't hear me?
No, you're back again. You're back again.
Oh, okay. So throughout this pain and the saga of my whistleblowing, I had my family support. It was really great. And I think having family there is really, really important. You do lose your friends. I've lost friends. I've lost colleagues. You know, you think you've built up a good relationship with your work colleagues, but even they step aside and nobody even contacts you, even, you know, and some friends that you had built up a relationship earlier, the minute they saw your name in the paper, they also didn't contact you. But the ones that stayed, you realize, were genuine friends. And your family were, my family, I can say, were my main support and sustenance even up to today. So I value them 100%. Thank you.
No, you all write about it in your books, this your colleagues, the silencing of your colleagues and the stepping away of your colleagues. Every single one of you have noted that. And it's a grim narrative. Athol, I hear your frustration and your anger as well. I mean, what is perhaps, I don't want to say interesting, but what comes out of all of this, and it comes out of what you were saying now, Athol, as well, is this idea of what is the role of the citizen in a country or a citizen in society, and what is the social compact that we should all be engaging in. And I'd love to maybe close off, because we are quite close on time now. I wonder if each of you could maybe address that. Mosilo, I'll start with you briefly.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Yes, we need active citizenship here. Apartheid was not #apartheid must fall. That revolution for our democracy and freedom required a social compact. Yeah. Lives were taken, people went to exile, tortured, families broken for the sake of our democracy. We are in a second revolution, and now that democracy was being stolen by the #1 citizen and 3 foreign brothers. And we said, God picked us, I would say, and said, we are sending you. And what we have all experienced is the fact that the citizen does not care. I remember when I was at Parliament and I said, I haven't worked for 18 years. It was all over Twitter, #FireMosilo. If only debit orders, medical aids can be paid with hashtags. It was John Shooter, the CEO of MTN, who said, no, not in my name. She shall be here and she will work here. And as uncomfortable as the other people were, like, how did she get here? And I have to say that the NGOs and the law firms also, when I decided, when I became famous, I can say, they were, when I went to Zondo, the first and second time, it was like a fashion parade. They were wanting to represent me pro bono. And I said, Plaf has been with me since 2016 when he didn't want to touch me. We talk about, we don't have, we made recommendations to Zondo. I would like those recommendations, and I saw that they were in his report, for physical protection, legal protection, reward, because our livelihoods have been completely taken. I mean, I'm 44 years old tomorrow. I have another 20 years left. I'm one of the blessed whistleblowers. I was invited by Minister Senzo Mtunu, can you believe, to be his special advisor. So I'm in the water and sanitation department. At least I'm bringing water to the people. But people right now, as long as it doesn't affect them, they can always switch off the TV. For us, we live with it every single day. And they want orange jumpsuits. Some of us will have to be subpoenaed to be criminal witnesses. And I'm asking South Africa, where will you be?
Yeah.
And what cost to us? Because the journey for me has just begun with that implementation of the Zondo report. So I think we need that social compact, and the president and Shamila Bitoy and everybody else to support whistleblowers. And I said, no, we're not whistleblowers. We are warriors, and we are victorious.
True citizens. You were true
Absolutely.
citizens.
Thank you. Thank you.
Athol, we talk about legislation and the Protected Disclosures Act, and we do have quite a discussion about that at the end of Cynthia's book, in a brilliant annexure, actually. It was quite fascinating for me. In closing, if you have to think about a social compact, or you have to think about citizenship, but if you have to think about what would you like to see happen?
I don't think the issue is about changing the law. I think that's an output of having the will to want to do something. I ended off my testament as on the commission saying, we live in the era of the bully, right? Bullies rule our country without consequence. And we need the era of the brave. We need brave people. And we've shown what that is. But if just three of us standing up, we will fail, and we are failing. What we need people is more South Africans in your job, wherever you are, to stand up as well, and that era of the brave. So that's what I think we need, Michelle. I think we need people to have the will, right? Again, we got to say, why is it that corporate South Africa, why is it that our president is not doing a thing? I haven't received an email, a phone call, an SMS, or WhatsApp, nothing from anyone. And I find that particularly shocking. And I think South Africans should be shocked by that. We were shocked by Shell wanting to go offshore and do its testing, which is great. A greater travesty is happening right now, and we are silent.
Yeah. Cynthia, I'm going to close off with you, if I may. Just looking at what we were talking about, Mosilo talking about the social compact, Athol, a brilliant, the era of the bully versus the era of the brave. What would you like to see happen?
What I'd like to see, Michelle, is that South Africans stand together. For me, right now, we've been divided by our politicians. We're divided by our religious affiliations, by race, by culture, and yet we all South Africans. So I believe we need to stand together firstly. We need to stand up for the truth. When we unite, there will be strength in unity. I fully am aware that it is so difficult to speak up, especially when we can see what's happening to whistleblowers. But if we don't do that, we will not have a South Africa. We will not have a legacy to leave to our children or our grandchildren. So what I'd like to appeal to every South African is to be that pebble in the pond, be the first one to make that difference and to influence in your sphere so we can effect change for a positive effect. Thank you.
Mosilo, Athol, Cynthia, I want to say thank you so much. And what I'm going to do, I know we're a minute over, but I'd like to just close off with some of the comments in the sidebar, because I think they pay tribute to the three of you. We'd like to pay it to Themba as well, but technology just did not allow, and he does deeply apologize for that as well. But Sina Mabuza says, you are true patriots of South Africa. Thank you for being so bold and not being bystanders when you know how cheap someone's life is in South Africa. Thank you so much for upholding our democracy in such high regard that you have risked everything. Your boldness speaks volumes on all your characters. Thank you. Jill Lloyd says, history will salute you. Shame on the apathy of now. And Ishmael says, I have wept through this whole session. I have wept with admiration for your courage, for the pain you have suffered and continue to endure. And I weep that our country has failed us. I want to say thank you to all of you for writing your books. Athol, you noted it quite clearly in the beginning when you said that, you know what, in no ways may we ever forget what has happened. We don't want to go to a case where there is revisionist history and people just ignore it completely. So the very nature of you all writing the book, I have to say thank you, and thank you. And
thank you,
I
Michelle.
hope you have a gentle evening this evening. And I want to say thank you once again for joining us. And to the rest of our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us as well. We look forward to keeping you well educated and entertained in the rest of the time of the writer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.